The terrifying sound of 8 50 caliber machine guns unleashing a storm of lead at 100 rounds per second was the last thing many Luftwaffe pilots ever heard. While German airmen entered combat believing they flew superior machines, the devastating firepower of the P-47 Thunderbolt shattered that illusion in seconds. The Americans had built something the Germans never expected, a fighter that could absorb punishment and deliver death with unprecedented ferocity. April 15th, 1943. The sky above northern France was a brilliant blue, a perfect backdrop for the drama about to unfold. Hauptmann Wilhelm Steiner, one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated aces with 28 confirmed kills, led a formation of 12 Focke-Wulf 192nd, the pride of German aviation engineering. Their mission was simple: intercept and destroy the American bombers targeting the crucial railway junction at Saint-Omer. Steiner had faced American fighters before, the sleek P-51 Mustangs and nimble P-38 Lightnings. But on this day, his squadron would encounter something different, something the German High Command had dismissed as unworthy of serious concern. Intelligence reports had mentioned the P-47 Thunderbolt, nicknamed the Jug by American pilots for its bulbous, bottle-like fuselage. German analysts scoffed at its size and weight. Too heavy to maneuver, they concluded, an easy target. This fatal miscalculation would cost the Luftwaffe dearly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As Steiner's squadron approached the bomber formation, they spotted the escort fighters, 16 massive P-47's from the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolf Pack. Leading them was Major Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who'd been told all his life he'd never amount to much. Today, he would prove everyone wrong. The Luftwaffe pilots, confident in superior aircraft, dove to attack. Steiner gave the order, Achtung, attack pattern Epsilon. The German formation broke apart with practiced precision, 12 predators converging on what they thought were easy prey. What happened next would become legend among Allied airmen. Johnson saw the German fighters approaching and calmly spoke into his radio. Wolfpack, let's show these boys what American engineering can do. Hold until 400 yards, then let 'em have it. The P-47's held their fire until the FW-190's were well within range. The German pilots, used to quick slashing attacks against more fragile aircraft, pressed their advantage. It was exactly what Johnson wanted. Steiner lined up his shot on a P-47 flying on the formation's edge. He squeezed the trigger of his 20mm cannons, seeing flashes as several rounds struck the American fighter. A smile crossed his face, another kill to add to his growing tally. But the smile vanished when the P-47 didn't explode, didn't falter, didn't even seem to notice the hits. Instead, it turned toward him with surprising agility for such a large aircraft. What Steiner didn't know, what the entire Luftwaffe didn't understand, was that Republic Aviation had designed the P-47 Thunderbolt to be virtually indestructible. Its massive radial engine was protected by layers of armor. Its control surfaces featured redundant systems, and its wings were reinforced to withstand tremendous punishment. But the P-47's most terrifying feature was its armament. 8 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, capable of firing 100 rounds per second when combined. No other fighter in the war carried such devastating firepower. As Johnson's P-47 turned to face Steiner's FW-190, the American pilot gently squeezed his trigger. The sound was unlike anything Steiner had ever heard, a roar like tearing canvas, magnified 100-fold. 8 streams of tracer fire converged on his aircraft, in less than 2 seconds, over 150. 50 caliber rounds slammed into the FW-190. The German fighter's canopy shattered, its wings buckled, its engine erupted in flames. Steiner barely had time to register what was happening before he was forced to bail out, watching his prized fighter spiral toward the French countryside in flames. All around him, the same scene repeated. The P-47's absorbed the initial German attack, then responded with overwhelming firepower. 5 FW-190s went down in the first 30 seconds of combat. The remaining German pilots, shocked by the devastating display, broke off their attack and fled. In just under 3 minutes, the invincible Luftwaffe squadron had lost 7 aircraft. The Americans lost none. When Steiner was captured later that day, he asked his American interrogator about the fighter that had shot him down. What kind of monster carries such firepower? The American captain smiled. That, Herr Hauptmann, is the P-47 Thunderbolt, and you've just met its 8.50 caliber arguments for American air superiority. News of the engagement spread quickly through the Luftwaffe. German pilots began calling the P-47 der Hammerschlag, the hammer blow, for its ability to deliver devastating, decisive strikes. But the true revelation came weeks later, when German intelligence finally obtained detailed information about the P-47's firepower. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, upon reading the report on the Thunderbolt's 8.50 caliber machine guns and their combined rate of fire, reportedly slammed his fist on his desk and exclaimed, "How can we fight an aircraft that fires more bullets in 1 second than our fighters can in 5? The answer, as the Luftwaffe would painfully discover, was that they couldn't, at least not on equal terms. The story of the P-47's development was as American as the fighter itself, a tale of innovation born from necessity and ambition. In 1940, as war raged in Europe, the United States Army Air Corps realized its fighter aircraft were woefully outclassed by their German and Japanese counterparts. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's chief designer, was tasked with creating a fighter that could outperform anything in the sky. Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant who had fled the Russian Revolution, embodied the American dream. With limited formal education but boundless determination, he had risen to become one of America's preeminent aircraft designers. When shown the performance requirements for the new fighter, he allegedly said, "Impossible with current engines, unless we make it bigger." And bigger it was. The P-47 was massive compared to other fighters, 36,000 pounds fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of the German FW-190. Pilots joked that you didn't so much fly a P-47 as wear it like a suit of armour. But Kartveli's true stroke of genius came in the aircraft's armament. While other designers debated the merits of cannons versus machine guns, Kartveli asked a simple question: why choose when we can overwhelm? The P-47 would carry 8.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute. Together, they delivered approximately 100 rounds per second in a devastating cone of fire that could tear apart any aircraft unfortunate enough to fly through it. When the design was presented to General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, he reportedly stared at the blueprint for a full minute before speaking. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "I believe you've created a flying tank." Arnold wasn't far off. The P-47 could absorb punishment that would destroy any other fighter. Its massive radial engine could continue running with several cylinders shot away. Its hydraulic control systems featured backup mechanical links. Pilots reported returning to base with hundreds of bullet holes and major components missing. One such pilot was Lieutenant James Sullivan, who found himself alone against 3 FW-190s during a mission over Belgium in October 1943. His P-47 took over 200 hits, including a 20mm cannon shell that passed through the cockpit, missing his head by inches. Yet he not only survived but managed to shoot down 2 of his attackers. When he finally landed at his base in England, the ground crew was astonished. One mechanic counted 237 bullet holes in the fuselage alone. The engine was leaking oil from 3 separate punctures. The right aileron was hanging by a single hinge, yet the massive fighter had brought Sullivan home. When asked how he'd managed to survive, Sullivan shrugged and said, "I just kept squeezing the trigger. Those 850s speak a language even the Luftwaffe understands." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The P-47's devastating firepower wasn't just about the raw number of bullets. It was about psychology. the effect of such overwhelming force on enemy pilots. Luftwaffe pilot Hans Dortenmann, who survived an encounter with a P-47 over the Netherlands, described it vividly in his post-war memoirs. "I heard a sound like the world tearing apart. My aircraft shuddered as if struck by lightning. In that moment, I understood true fear. No pilot who has faced the American Thunderbolt's guns ever forgets that sound." This psychological impact extended beyond individual dogfights. By mid-1944, Luftwaffe pilots were developing specific tactics just to avoid P-47 seconds. Some refused to engage them at all unless they had an overwhelming numerical advantage. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe following the D-Day landings, the P-47 evolved from pure fighter to fighter bomber. Its robust construction and massive payload capacity made it ideal for ground attack missions. Loaded with bombs and rockets, it became the scourge of German ground forces. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, in one of his last reports before being wounded by a strafing P-47, warned Hitler directly, "The enemy's air superiority has a very grave effect on our movements. There is hardly any traffic on the roads by day, and the movement of our troops is only possible at night. Fighting power and morale suffer accordingly." What Rommel didn't mention, perhaps because it was too demoralizing, was the specific terror inspired by the P-47's strafing runs. German soldiers called it Zahnschmerzen des Teufels, the devil's toothache, for the distinctive sound of 850 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously. One German infantry officer, captured after his unit was strafed by P-47 seconds near Saint-Omer, told his American interrogators, "We heard them coming and dove for cover. The noise, like God himself tearing the sky open with his bare hands. 6 of my men were killed without ever seeing the aircraft. How can anyone fight against such a weapon?" The answer, increasingly, was that they couldn't, and the Luftwaffe knew it. By early 1944, German aircraft production was still increasing, but pilot quality was plummeting. Training programs were shortened to rush replacements to the front. Fuel shortages meant new pilots received minimal flight time before being thrust into combat. These rookies, barely able to control their aircraft in good conditions, were no match for veteran American pilots flying the heavily armed P-47 seconds. Luftwaffe Colonel Johannes Steinhoff described it as sending children with wooden swords to fight armored knights. The statistics told the grim story. Between January and May 1944, the 56th Fighter Group, flying exclusively P-47 seconds, destroyed 504 German aircraft while losing only 19 of their own planes in combat. The kill ratio was an astonishing 26-1. Major Robert Johnson, who had led that fateful mission over France in April 1943, would finish the war with 28 confirmed kills, all achieved in the P-47. When asked about his success, he credited the aircraft's firepower. With 50 seconds, you don't have to be the best shot. You just need to get your target inside your cone of fire for half a second. Perhaps the most telling tribute to the P-47's devastating impact came from Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland. After the war, during a conference of fighter pilots from both sides, he was asked what he would have wanted most during the conflict. His answer was immediate: Spitfires for maneuverability, P-51 seconds for range, and P-47 seconds for firepower and ruggedness. Had the Luftwaffe possessed the Thunderbolt, with its 850 caliber machine guns, the air war over Europe might have ended very differently. By the summer of 1944, the psychological impact of the P-47's firepower had grown to near mythical proportions among German forces. Luftwaffe pilots reported being able to identify P-47 squadrons not by sight, but by the distinctive pattern of destruction they left behind. German reconnaissance photographs showed forests of downed aircraft with a particular type of damage, not the clean punctures of 20mm cannon shells or the ragged tiers of explosive rounds, but hundreds of 50 caliber holes clustered in lethal patterns across fuselages, wings, and cockpits. One German intelligence officer reportedly remarked, "You can always tell when the Thunderbolts have been active. Their victims look as though they've been stitched with a giant sewing machine. This reputation extended to ground forces as well. After a P-47 attack on a German motorized column near Cayenne in July 1944, surviving soldiers were found in a state of near catatonia. Their commander, when questioned by medical officers, could only repeat, the sound, like the sky being torn apart. What made the P-47's guns particularly devastating wasn't just their number, but their synchronization and convergence. Republic aviation engineers had designed a system that allowed all 8 .50 caliber Brownings to focus their fire at a specific distance, usually set at 300 yards, creating a lethal cone of converging bullets. At the convergence point, all 8 streams of .50 caliber rounds would intersect in a space roughly the size of an automobile. Any aircraft caught in this zone would be hit by dozens of high-velocity rounds in a fraction of a second. The psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots was profound. German ace Günther Rahl, who survived the war with 275 confirmed victories, admitted after the conflict, "When we saw the Thunderbolts, we knew we faced a decision: fight and possibly die, or run and definitely live to fight another day. Many chose the latter." By late 1944, the situation for the Luftwaffe had become desperate. Fuel shortages grounded many aircraft. Experienced pilots were increasingly scarce, and still the P-47's came, their 8-gun batteries speaking the final word in many engagements. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the weather finally gave the German forces the cover they needed from Allied air power. For several crucial days, low clouds and snow kept the P-47's grounded. German forces made significant progress during this window, pushing American troops back and creating the famous bulge in the Allied lines. Hitler himself reportedly said, "As long as the weather holds, we have a chance." But the weather didn't hold. On December 23, the skies cleared. What followed was one of the most devastating air attacks of the war, as hundreds of P-47's descended on the exposed German forces. Captain Walter Beckham, leading a squadron of P-47's that day, later described the scene. "It was like shooting fish in a barrel. The Germans had their vehicles bumper to bumper on those narrow roads. When 16 Thunderbolts hit them with 8 guns each, that's 128 heavy machine guns firing simultaneously. The result was absolute devastation. In a single day, P-47's flew over 900 sorties, destroying an estimated 257 German tanks and armoured vehicles, 1,326 other vehicles, and 65 artillery pieces. The German advance stalled, never to regain momentum. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, architect of the Ardennes offensive, would later identify December 23 as the day the operation failed. "Once the American Thunderbolts returned," he said, "our fate was sealed. What the Germans never fully grasped, until it was too late, was that the P-47's 8 .50 caliber machine guns represented more than just firepower. They symbolized America's industrial might, its abundance of resources, its confidence in overwhelming force. While German engineers debated the relative merits of 20mm versus 30mm cannons, painstakingly crafting precision weapons in limited quantities, American factories were churning out Browning machine guns and .50 caliber ammunition by the millions. It was a perfect reflection of the broader war effort. Germany built 1,347 FW-190 D9 their most advanced piston engine fighter. In roughly the same period, Republic Aviation produced 15,636 P-47 Thunderbolts. This disparity extended to the pilots as well. While the Luftwaffe was forced to send half-trained replacements into combat, the USAAF's training program produced a steady stream of well-prepared aviators. They might not have had the experience of veteran German pilots, but they had something perhaps more valuable: confidence in their aircraft's superiority. As the war ground on into 1945, the legend of the P-47's devastating firepower only grew. German pilots began to develop a sixth sense for when they might encounter the dreaded Thunderbolts. Some claimed they could feel the distinctive vibration in the air moments before those 8 .50 caliber guns opened fire, though for many this realization came too late. One Luftwaffe pilot, Oberleutnant Kurt Meyer, survived an encounter that would later become infamous within the German Air Force. Flying a Messerschmitt Bf 109G over the Rhine in February 1945, Meyer spotted what he thought was an isolated P-47, a straggler, separated from its formation and vulnerable. Meyer, with over 30 victories to his name, saw an opportunity to add another American to his tally. He maneuvered his Bf 109 into an attacking position, diving from above and behind, the textbook approach. What he didn't know was that he was falling into a carefully laid trap. The vulnerable P-47 was flown by Captain Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group, a veteran with thousands of combat hours who had deliberately slowed his aircraft to appear damaged. As Meyer closed to firing range, Drew executed a maneuver that German pilots had come to fear, the P-47's Split S. Despite its size, in the hands of an experienced pilot, the Thunderbolt could perform this vertical reversal with surprising agility. Drew's P-47 flipped onto its back and dived, then pulled up behind the shocked German fighter. What happened next would be recounted in Luftwaffe mess halls with a mixture of awe and dread. Drew didn't immediately open fire. He closed to just 200 yards, well inside the optimal convergence point of his 8 .50 caliber machine guns, ensuring that every round would find its mark. When he squeezed the trigger, all 8 Brownings spoke as one. In less than 2 seconds, over 150 high-velocity rounds tore through Meyer's aircraft. The Bf 109's tail section was completely severed from the fuselage. The German fighter quite literally came apart in mid-air. Meyer survived only by the slimmest of margins, his parachute deploying automatically when his aircraft disintegrated around him. When captured later that day, he was still in shock. "It wasn't combat," he told his American interrogators. "It was execution." This incident reinforced what the Luftwaffe had painfully learned over 2 years of combat against the P-47. When its 8 guns found their target, survival was a matter of luck, not skill. By early 1945, the psychological impact of the Thunderbolt's firepower had reached such proportions that some German pilots refused orders to engage them, preferring court-martial to what they saw as certain death. One Luftwaffe group commander reportedly had to threaten his pilots with immediate execution if they turned away from P-47 seconds. The American pilots, meanwhile, developed an almost religious faith in their aircraft's firepower. Captain Raymond Knight of the 348th Fighter Group expressed it best in a letter home. "In my Thunderbolt, I feel like Zeus hurling thunderbolts. When all 8 guns fire, it's like the hand of God reaching out to smite the enemy." There's something biblical about that kind of power. This power was not limited to air-to-air combat. As the Allied armies pushed deeper into Germany, the P-47's ground attack capabilities proved equally devastating. With its 8 .50 caliber machine guns, supplemented by bombs and rockets, the Thunderbolt became the scourge of German armor, transportation, and infantry alike. During one particularly effective mission in March 1945, a group of 24 P-47 seconds caught a German armoured column in open terrain near Paderborn. In just 7 minutes, they destroyed 85 vehicles, including 14 tanks. A German officer who survived the attack later described it as not warfare, but industrialized slaughter. The sound of the P-47's guns became so feared that German troops developed specific protocols for when they heard the distinctive roar. Unlike the siren of the Ju-87 Stuka, deliberately designed to terrify, the Thunderbolt's voice was a natural byproduct of its armament. 8 heavy machine guns firing simultaneously created a sound like nothing else in the war. One German infantry captain, captured after his company was strafed near Remagen, told his interrogators, "We trained to identify aircraft by engine sound. The American P-51 has a distinctive whistle. The P-38 makes a crackling noise. But the P-47, when you hear that sound, like the sky itself is being torn open, you don't need to look up, you only need to pray." Morale was devastating. By April 1945, German ground forces had taken to travelling almost exclusively at night. Any daylight movement invited the attention of roving P-47's, whose pilots had become expert at spotting camouflaged vehicles. German field commanders reported increasing difficulty in getting their troops to maintain defensive positions when P-47's were active in their sector. One report to Berlin stated bluntly, "The men will face Soviet tanks, but they run from the Thunderbolts. Against the former, they believe they have a chance. Against the latter, they know they have none." This psychological impact extended to the highest levels of German command. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, wrote in his memoirs that by 1945, the American fighter bombers had effectively paralyzed Germany's industrial system. The P-47's and other fighter bombers made it impossible to move materials or finished products during daylight hours. Our production schedules became increasingly theoretical as transportation networks collapsed under the weight of these attacks. But it was in the air that the P-47's 8-gun battery found its most dramatic expression. The sheer volume of fire could accomplish what precision often could not, overwhelming an enemy aircraft regardless of its maneuverability or armor. Lieutenant Richard Turner of the 56th Fighter Group demonstrated this during an engagement over Berlin in March 1945. Pursuing a Focke-Wulf 190, Turner found himself unable to get a clean shot as the nimble German fighter twisted and turned. Rather than continuing a fruitless tail chase, Turner pulled up and away, seemingly breaking off the engagement. The German pilot, believing he had escaped, straightened his flight path momentarily. It was all Turner needed. Diving from above, he triggered all 8 50-caliber machine guns in a brief 1-second burst. In that single second, approximately 100 rounds converged on the German fighter. The FW-190 didn't explode or break apart. It simply disintegrated, transformed from aircraft to cloud of debris in an eye blink. Turner's gun camera footage of this engagement was later used in USAAF training films, accompanied by the instructor's commentary, "This is what 8 50-caliber machine guns can do when properly employed. This isn't a dogfight, it's an execution." This brutal efficiency was ultimately what made the P-47's firepower so psychologically devastating. It wasn't just that you might be shot down, it was that you would be obliterated, your aircraft reduced to fragments, your survival left to pure chance. As the war in Europe approached its end, the Luftwaffe found itself not just defeated but psychologically broken. German pilots, once the proud knights of the sky, had been reduced to prey, scurrying between clouds to avoid the dreaded Thunderbolts. A captured German signals intelligence report from April 1945 revealed the depth of this demoralization. Monitoring American radio traffic, German operators had noted a particular exchange that was circulated to all remaining Luftwaffe units as a warning. American pilot: "Bandits, 3 o'clock high, looks like 109 seconds. Squadron leader: Roger. Wolfpack, climb to Angels 20, let them come to us. American pilot: Sir, they've spotted us, they're running. Squadron leader: Of course they are, son. They know what these jugs can do. The fact that this mundane radio exchange was treated as significant intelligence spoke volumes about the Luftwaffe's state of mind. They were no longer fighting to win, they were struggling merely to survive. In the final weeks of the war, this psychological advantage proved as important as any tactical or strategic edge. German pilots increasingly refused combat, preserved their aircraft rather than engaging, and in some cases deliberately sought out P-51 Mustangs to surrender to, believing they would face better odds than against the heavily armed Thunderbolts. After the German surrender in May 1945, Allied intelligence officers conducted extensive interviews with captured Luftwaffe personnel. When asked about which American aircraft they feared most, the answers were telling. While many German pilots praised the P-51 Mustang's range and agility, and others noted the P-38 Lightning's distinctive profile and heavy nose armament, an overwhelming majority reserved their most visceral responses for the P-47. Oberstleutnant Werner Mulders, one of Germany's most decorated pilots, summarized it bluntly: "The Mustang we could fight, the lightning we could avoid. But the Thunderbolt, when those 8 guns opened up, you felt the hand of God had reached down to strike you personally." This sentiment was echoed throughout the ranks. A Luftwaffe ground crewman stationed near Frankfurt recalled, "We could often repair aircraft that returned with damage from 20mm cannon, clean holes, specific systems hit. But the planes that faced the Thunderbolts, if they returned at all, looked like they had been run through a meat grinder. Hundreds of holes, systems shredded, often barely holding together. We had a saying, 'Cannon makes holes, but 50 calibers make Swiss cheese.'" The raw numbers told the story of the P-47's devastating impact. By war's end, Thunderbolt pilots had claimed over 7,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and on the ground. This came at the cost of 3,752 P-47 seconds lost to all causes, a remarkable record considering the intensity of the aerial warfare over Europe. But perhaps the most telling statistic was this: in head-to-head dogfights against Luftwaffe fighters, the P-47 achieved a kill ratio of 4.6 to 1. This despite the fact that German fighters were generally more maneuverable and, on paper at least, better suited to air-to-air combat. The explanation for this disparity came down to 3 factors: the P-47's ruggedness, the skill of its pilots, and the devastating effect of those 8.50 caliber machine guns. When combined, these elements created an aircraft that could absorb punishment, deliver death, and break the enemy's will to fight. After the war, the legacy of the P-47's firepower lived on in the design philosophy of American fighter aircraft. While European designers continued to debate the merits of fewer, larger caliber weapons, American engineers embraced the concept of overwhelming volume of fire. The F-86 Sabre, America's premier fighter of the Korean War era, carried 6 50 caliber machine guns, a direct descendant of the P-47's armament philosophy. When asked why not 4 guns, or even 2 heavier cannons, the chief designer reportedly answered, "Because 8 was too many for the airframe, and 4 wasn't enough for the pilot's confidence." This philosophy reached its ultimate expression in modern aircraft like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, deliberately named after the P-47, whose 30mm GAU-8 Avenger Gatling gun can fire 3,900 rounds per minute, creating the same psychological impact on enemy ground forces that the P-47's 8.50 calibers once had on Luftwaffe pilots. But for those who flew and fought in the European theatre of World War II, the original Thunderbolt's firepower remained the standard against which all others were measured. As one P-47 pilot put it in his memoirs, "With 850s you didn't just shoot down enemy aircraft, you erased them from the sky." The story of the P-47's devastating 8-gun battery is more than just a tale of technology or tactics. It's a reminder of how psychological factors can amplify physical effects in warfare. The Thunderbolt's guns weren't just weapons, they were instruments of psychological domination, creating an impact far beyond their mechanical function. For the Luftwaffe pilots who faced them, those 8.50 caliber machine guns represented not just a threat to their aircraft, but a fundamental challenge to their identity as elite warriors. The P-47 didn't just defeat them physically, it broke them mentally. In the decades following the war, aviation historians would debate the relative merits of various fighter aircraft, which was fastest, which climbed best, which turned tightest. But for the pilots who actually fought in those desperate aerial battles, such academic discussions missed the essential point. As Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, the top-scoring P-47 ace with 28 victories, put it, "You can argue about maneuverability and climb rate all day long, but when 850s start talking, the argument is over." This sentiment was echoed by his German counterparts. After the war, several Luftwaffe aces were invited to fly captured P-47 seconds as part of the technical evaluation process. Their reactions were remarkably consistent. Erich Hauptmann, the war's top-scoring fighter pilot with 352 confirmed victories, climbed into a P-47's cockpit with visible skepticism. After his flight, his comment was succinct. "A remarkable weapon. Had I faced this regularly instead of the Russians, my score would have been considerably lower, if I had survived at all." Another German ace, Günther Rahl, was more expansive. The P-47 wasn't just an aircraft, it was a philosophy made manifest. The American approach to warfare. Why solve a problem with precision when you can obliterate it with firepower? Those 8 guns speaking together. It wasn't just physically destructive, it was spiritually crushing. This psychological dimension extended beyond individual combat to shape entire operational doctrines. By late 1944, Luftwaffe commanders were explicitly ordering their pilots to avoid engagement with P-47 formations unless they had at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage, a tacit admission that each Thunderbolt was worth multiple German fighters. Even with such advantages, German pilots approached such engagements with dread. Intercepted communications revealed pilots arguing over who would make the initial attack, knowing that whoever drew the Americans' attention first would likely face the full fury of those 8-gun batteries. One Luftwaffe pilot, captured after bailing out over Belgium, explained this reluctance. "You must understand, it wasn't cowardice, it was mathematics. When 850s open up, they saturate a volume of space with lead. It doesn't matter how good your reflexes are or how well you can fly. If you're in that space, you die." Period. This brutal calculus of survival led to increasingly desperate measures. By early 1945, some German squadrons were designating sacrificial aircraft, typically flown by newer, less experienced pilots, whose job was to draw the Americans' fire while their comrades attempted to attack from more favorable positions. Such tactics rarely succeeded and further damaged already fragile morale. A Luftwaffe psychological evaluation from February 1945 noted, "Pilot cohesion is deteriorating rapidly as men realize they are being classified as expendable or valuable based purely on experience. This is exacerbated by the perceived futility of engaging American Thunderbolts, regardless of tactical advantage." The culmination of this psychological breakdown came in March 1945, when an entire Jagdgeschwader fighter wing briefly mutinied after being ordered to intercept a formation of P-47 seconds, escorting bombers to Berlin. The commanding officer had to threaten summary execution before his pilots would take off. They engaged as ordered, and the results were predictable. 12 German fighters destroyed for the loss of 3 P-47 seconds. More telling than the numerical outcome was the after-action report, in which the German commander noted, "The men flew with technical competence but without spirit. They went through the motions of combat without the will to close decisively. Their hearts and minds had already accepted defeat." This collapse of fighting spirit wasn't limited to the air. German ground forces developed a Pavlovian response to the sound of P-47 seconds. Veterans described how a column of troops or vehicles would scatter at the first distant rumble of Thunderbolt engines, often before any aircraft were visually identified. One Wehrmacht officer, writing in his journal in April 1945, captured this psychological impact. "The men no longer fear specific things, bullets, bombs, tanks, they fear sounds, the whistle of artillery, the rumble of Soviet armor tracks, and above all, the tearing canvas roar of the Thunderbolt's guns. That sound has become the voice of their inevitable defeat." What made this psychological effect so powerful was its basis in brutal reality. The P-47's 8.50 caliber machine guns weren't a terror weapon designed primarily for psychological impact, like the Stuka's sirens. They were simply an incredibly effective killing mechanism whose psychological effects were a natural byproduct of their physical destruction. Each Browning M2.50 caliber machine gun fired a 700-grain bullet at approximately 2,900 feet per second. Each round delivered over 11,000 foot-pounds of energy on impact, enough to penetrate an inch of hardened steel at 200 yards. With 8 guns firing simultaneously, A 1-second burst could deliver over 100 such rounds to the target. No aircraft of the era could withstand such punishment. Even armored areas would eventually succumb to the hammering effect of multiple heavy impacts in close succession. And unarmored components, control surfaces, fuel tanks, engines, and of course the pilot, were immediately vulnerable. This raw destructive power created a feedback loop of psychological effectiveness. German pilots knew the Thunderbolt's reputation was based on real capability, not propaganda. This knowledge transformed normal combat anxiety into existential dread, further reducing their effectiveness and confirming the P-47's superiority. By the war's final months, this psychological advantage had become so pronounced that P-47 pilots reported German fighters breaking off engagements at the first sign of the Thunderbolt's guns, sometimes before any rounds had actually struck their aircraft. Captain Walker Mahurin, a P-47 ace with 21 victories, described one such encounter in his post-war memoir. "I got just a split-second burst off, maybe 10 rounds total, and saw a few tracers pass well behind his aircraft. The next thing I knew, the 109 was rolling over and diving away as if the devil himself was on his tail. He hadn't been hit, wasn't in any immediate danger, but just the sound of my guns was enough to send him running." This reputation survived well beyond the end of hostilities. During post-war interviews, captured Luftwaffe pilots were asked to rank American fighters in terms of various characteristics: speed, climb rate, dive capability, and so on. When it came to firepower, the voting wasn't even close. Every single interviewed pilot ranked the P-47 first, with one adding the note, "There is the P-47, and then there is everything else." The difference is not of degree but of kind. In the final analysis, the P-47 Thunderbolt's 8 50-caliber machine guns represented more than just a weapons system. They were a statement of American industrial and technological philosophy, a belief that problems could be solved through the application of overwhelming force rather than finesse. While German engineers debated the perfect balance of rate of fire versus projectile weight, and Japanese designers sought the ideal maneuverability for dogfighting, American engineers simply asked, "How many guns can we fit on this thing?" The answer, 8, proved more than sufficient to secure air superiority over Europe and help bring about the defeat of Nazi Germany. The psychological impact of these weapons continued long after their physical destruction had ended, shaping military aviation doctrine for decades to come. Even today, pilots who fly modern descendants of the Thunderbolt, like the A-10, speak of the psychological effect their weapons have on enemy forces. As one A-10 pilot from Operation Desert Storm noted, "When that GAU-8 starts firing, it's not just depleted uranium that hits the target. It's 70 years of psychological conditioning that says, when Americans bring this kind of firepower, the fight is already over." This legacy, the combination of physical destruction and psychological dominance, remains the true measure of the P-47's 8 50-caliber guns and their 100 round per second symphony of destruction. They didn't just win battles in the sky over Europe, they broke the enemy's will to continue fighting. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph came from a Luftwaffe pilot captured in the war's final weeks. When asked by his American interrogator what he thought of the P-47, he replied simply, "Your Thunderbolts taught us something we Germans never wanted to learn, that there are some enemies you cannot defeat through skill or courage or determination. Some forces are simply too overwhelming to resist." He paused, then added, "The sound of your 850s will echo in my nightmares long after this war is forgotten by everyone else." For the pilots who flew the Thunderbolt, this combination of physical and psychological dominance created a unique bond with their aircraft. Unlike the sleek, thoroughbred Mustang or the elegant, twin-boomed Lightning, the P-47 was often described as ugly, brutish, or ungainly. Yet those who flew it into combat developed an almost fanatical loyalty to the big fighter. As one pilot put it, "The Mustang pilots had a sports car. We had a tank with 8 machine guns. Guess which one I'd rather take into combat?" This sentiment was echoed throughout the fighter groups equipped with the Thunderbolt. When some units began transitioning to P-51 seconds in late 1944, There were numerous requests from veteran pilots to keep their P-47 seconds. Many cited the same reason: "I trust those 8 guns with my life." That trust was well placed. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, the P-47 had established itself as one of history's great fighter aircraft, not through elegance or agility, but through raw firepower and survivability. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns had written their place in aviation history, with lines of tracer fire and the distinctive sound that haunted its enemies. In the final accounting, those guns had done more than destroy aircraft or kill pilots. They had broken the spirit of an air force that had once considered itself invincible. They had demonstrated that industrial might and overwhelming force could triumph over tradition and finesse, and they had established a psychological dominance that extended far beyond their physical effects. The Luftwaffe never knew, until it was far too late, what those 8 guns could do. By the time they learned, the lesson had already been written in fire and lead across the skies of Europe. It was a lesson summarized perfectly by the P-47 pilot's unofficial motto: 8 guns, no waiting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.